Hello tubers, and welcome to our revised limited set review here of Murders at Karlov Manor. Thanks to Wizards of the Coast for sponsoring this video. So this is going to be a retouch of the limited rankings I have for this format. I went in before playing with this format, gave commons and uncommons in each color a ranking. We're going to go back and retouch upon those now that we've had a couple of weeks of play, and there are some pretty big shakeups. First and foremost, let's start with white. We're going to go in Wooburg order. I will even touch upon some of the multicolor cards as well. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe, and let's jump off into white. We're going to start off with the Market Watch Phantom. This is one of white's best commons in my opinion. This format, I thought it was going to be starting on turn 3 often, just because everybody has the 3-mana disguise cards, but no, if you have something to do on turns 1 or 2 and really can get ahead, that is going to put you in a really good position during any individual game. Market Watch Phantom is a fantastic 2-drop. It effectively has flying, and so if you play this on turn 2, you are going to chip in for a ton of damage. As we see with white, it is a more aggressive color for sure, so Market Watch Phantom is one of the best white commons. Let's follow that up with Inside Source. Similarly aggressive. This is a 3-mana 1/1. That ETB, it makes a 2/2 detective, and the Inside Source itself has the ability to pump up one of your other detectives in addition to giving it vigilance. This is another really good role player in the white decks. It has a bunch of different synergies, but most importantly, it's a really good curve filler. I mean, if your opponent's playing 3-mana 2/2s and you're playing 3-mana 1/1s that make a 2/2, well, you're getting a lot of value there already. So another nice one for the white go wide decks. And maybe to nobody's surprise, I think the number 1 common I have for white is going to be the Novice Inspector. There's not really much you can say about this card. It's just really freaking good. Like I said, if you're playing things on turn 1 or 2, you're usually getting ahead of your opponent already. This one adds some card advantage with the Clue, of which you can do any number of things. There are a bunch of artifact synergies in the format, or if you want to just sacrifice it and draw a card, great. But Novice Inspector, really hard to beat in terms of a common. The number 1 uncommon I have for white is a little bit of a change up now. It's going to be that Neighborhood Guardian. 2-mana 2/2. This one is extremely aggressive. Whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, target creature you control gets +1/+1 to end of turn. So this is a way to keep the pressure going even on a quote-unquote bear, a 2/2 for 2. One of the best curves you can do in this format is with basically all the cards we've outlisted. You go like turn 1 Novice Inspector, turn 2 Neighborhood Guardian, turn 3 Inside Source. That's a really hard game to lose if you have anything really to back it up. So that rounds out the white cards, and yeah, they are all very aggressively slanted. Let's move on to blue. I still have Projector Inspector as one of the best blue commons, but this is kind of a case of, of the blue cards maybe just not being very good, at least not in comparison to white. I do like Projector Inspector quite a bit. Does trade down often enough because of that 2 toughness, but it is a detective. It loots if you want to when it itself enters the battlefield, or anytime you have another detective either enter or flip up. So good card selection. There are a lot of synergies with the graveyard as well, collect evidence or otherwise. I like Projector Inspector as one of the top blue commons. Next we have the Cold Case Cracker. This is 4 mana for the 3/3 flying. When it dies, you investigate. It's pretty classic, right? 4 mana 3/3 flyers in any case are very common in blue. This one has a little bit of upside, of course, but I have that as like the number 2 blue common. And number 1, I hate to say it, it's a big shakeup. This is Out Cold. This card has been fantastic. This is a blue and 3 instant. Spell cannot be countered, so you cast this on one of those disguise creatures. You do not have to pay the ward cost. This card will still resolve. And tapping 2 creatures for multiple turns often ends up being just killing the creatures outright in this format. Furthermore, you get a clue in addition. So in my blue decks, I enjoy having at the very least 1 Out Cold. I've ran upwards of 3 in this format and haven't been upset about it. So Out Cold, maybe the best blue common. Let's go to the uncommon. I'm going to keep it as the Exit Specialist. You can't really go wrong with this one, whether it's coming down on turn 2 just for curve out purposes, or you're playing it later on as a disguise and flipping up a creature. The tempo of 2 mana bounce an opposing creature, or even your own if you're trying to protect it or has a good enter the battlefield ability, is just so good. So Exit Specialist, no surprise, best blue uncommon. Black has some shakeups as well. I have Snarling Gorehound as one of Black's best commons now. This is 1 mana, 1/1 menace. Whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, surveil 1. So Black is often considered the worst color in this format, and I would agree. But the Snarling Gorehound is one of just like a really good card selection effect in Black. It comes down early, it attacks relatively well, right? The menace means it's going to poke in often enough, and you back it up with any tricks or removal, and they're going to have a harder time dealing with it. But the effect of just setting up your draws or fueling your graveyard has been really clutch. So Snarling Gorehound, I think, quite solid. Slice from Shadow is going to be, I think, the next Black common I have on this list. Just a fantastic removal spell. I often rate this higher than even Murder in the format, just because, again, you can kill a disguised creature with Slice from Shadows on turn 3. You cannot do that with Murder, and still Slice from Shadows scales well into the later stages of the game. So I think the top Black common for me nowadays is actually Extract a Confession. Sacrifice effects are generally just okay in Limited, but this one's pretty versatile enough. The fact that if you can collect the evidence, you're going to make your opponent sacrifice their highest power creature has been very, very good as well. So it's good on turn 2. And then it's good again later in the game, generally speaking, unless your opponent has nothing but 2/2s. But even then, you're making them sacrifice one of them. So I've been really impressed by Extract a Confession. I actually omitted Murder from this list. You could probably put Murder over like the Gorehound and just have 3 Black removal spells. But the more I draft, the more I just don't really care about Murder. So number 1 uncommon for Black, Long Goodbye. This is no surprise. This card, similar to Slice from Shadows, cannot be countered, which means on turn 2 or 3, you can just kill a disguised creature for 2 mana, no problem. It also deals with other random threats, of course, because you can kill something else that costs 3 or less. But Long Goodbye, one of the best cards that you can see at uncommon. Let's move to red. I have Offender at Large now as one of the best red commons. This card has played out tremendously well. First and foremost, 5 mana for a 5/4 is not a bad rate, and this one can help push in some extra damage if you're aggressive, which you're generally trying to be in this format. And then of course you can disguise it for the same amount. This card's been really good. It pushes races, it lets your smaller creatures trade up, of which there are a lot of smaller creatures in red. So Offender at Large has been really, really clutch. Next up we have the Galvanize, just solid removal. 2 mana, 3 damage, and then if you've drawn a card, which red can make a bunch of clues, then you can deal 5 damage to something. So another card that's good early and still pretty good late, especially if you have ways to draw those extra cards. Maybe to no surprise, I have Shock at number 1. It just deals with everything early on, even the ward creatures, right? You can still just pay 3 for a Shock, and that's a good rate. And the fact that this goes face often comes up relevant enough. But Shock is an easy pick for top red common for me, I think. Red uncommon, I have Reckless Detective. This is 2 mana, 0/3, and 3 toughness is a very relevant amount in the format, right? This blocks all of disguised creatures early and even all the random small white creatures as well. And this has some good synergy with clues. If you have a clue, you can sacrifice it to the detective. It pumps up the detective, you still draw a card, and you didn't have to invest into that clue with other mana. So this is a great even turn 2 play in red. Helps you smooth out your draws and has some other synergies as well. Big fan of the Reckless Detective. Moving on to green, there hasn't been much of a shakeup here. The 3 green commons I listed are the 3 green commons I had at the beginning. That is Topiary Panther, Nervous Gardener, and Tunnel Tipster. Let's start with the Panther. This one's that 6 mana, 6/5 trample with basic land cycling stapled to it. So this is just a fantastic early game play as you set up, find your mana or whatnot. And 6 mana, 6/5, this card has won many games in the format. More so because it has trample in addition to the big body, but Topiary Panther, one of the better green commons for sure. Nervous Gardener next, I have that as it's a 2 mana 2/2 if you want to, or you play it Disguise. And then for a single green, you can flip it up. And similar to the Panther, you're gonna be able to find a land. I mentioned this last time, but because this searches for a land card with a basic land type, you can search up the Surveil lands if you have one of those in your deck. It does not just have to be, a forest or a plains or whatever. You can grab one of those duals because of that. And that does come up often enough because the lands are rares in this format, and you can draft those as well. Tunnel Tipster, I think, is my best green common. Again, comes down a turn earlier than all the disguises. It gets bigger when you have disguises, and green has a lot of larger effects that really utilize the tipster well to come back from the early pressure from other decks. Number 1 green common I have, well, I was a little bit torn between a leg up and this one, but we have that as a Killer Among Us. This card has similarly been really, really impressive. It does not look like much at first, and true, if you're behind, this card is a little bit awkward, but it still gives 3 bodies for 5 mana. Now, notably, you have to be attacking with the chosen creature to give that creature the buff. So again, that is why it's a little bit awkward when you're trying to be defensive, but even still, a Killer Among Us has been fantastic. So those round out all of the 1-color cards. I'm going to touch upon a couple of my favorite multicolor commons as well, as there are a bunch of multicolor cards in the format. Now remember, with these multicolor cards, you don't always have to be in their initial 2-color pairing. You can often disguise them and then flip them up for one of the 2 colors, as long as you have 2 of that individual color. Let's start with Gadget Technician. This is the red-blue common disguised creature. It's a 3/2 for 4. When it enters or is turned face up, you get a 1/1 Thopter with flying. Disguise is only 2 of either blue or red or some combination. This card has been tremendous for me. Oftentimes, you're going to be hard casting this, right? If you have a different disguised creature to cast on turn 3, you'll often just hard cast the Technician on turn 4, and it is still fantastic. So, been really happy with the Gadget Technician, whether you're playing red or blue or a combination of the both. Next up, we have the Granite Witness, and that's the blue-white common disguised creature. This is the 3/2 flying vigilance with disguise for just a blue, a white, or some combination. And when it's turned face up, you may tap or untap target creature. 3/2 flying vigilance is just a good body, and this is a detective, so you combo this with like Thinking Cap, and you've built your own Sarah Angel. Granite Witness has been really good for racing as well, right? You can attack in, tap down something, or whatever. I think the best multicolor common is Dog Walker, and I hate to say it because this type of card makes me cry, but this is the red-white 3/1 vigilance, disguise for red-white or combination, and when it's turned face up, you make 2 tapped, notably 1/1 white dog creature tokens. But again, white is the go wide strategy, and Dog Walker is fantastic at doing that. So my initial guesses weren't too far off, or at least my initial thoughts on this format weren't too far off, but it's always interesting to see, you know, after you've played with the format a bit, where things shake up. And for the most part, and especially if you're playing best of 1 on Arena, for example, the format does lend itself to be more aggressive. That does not mean you can't build slower decks, but I think for the most part, you're better off trying to do stuff early. So, and I think that reflects in my opinions of the cards I've listed here. So thanks all for watching. And again, thanks to Wizards of the Coast for sponsoring this video. Hopefully you found it interesting, informative. Go play in your Murders at Karlov Manor drafts with this new information. Go fight and win. And if you want to purchase some Murders at Karlov Manor, check my link in the video description. We'll see you later.